Okay, see, Westcon-Comstor, your latest responsible business report shows important progress in some key areas around sustainability and emissions reduction. Perhaps you can give us the sort of overview, the high-level view of the main findings, and then we can drill down a bit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely made some significant progress with regards to our carbon emissions. I think that's really where a huge area of the focus of the report has come from. We now source 50% of our electricity globally from renewables, which is up 42% from last year, which was fantastic. A lot of that was that we've transitioned to fully renewable energy in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And we really recognise that whilst this is significant progress in these areas, continuous improvement is always needed, especially in a company like us and our size. And we're really dedicated to making sure that we're accelerating that progress, both in our business and then also really trying to support the whole supply chain.
Okay, and in terms of the increase from 42 to 50% renewable electricity globally, was there anything in particular that you did to, what were the actions that got you to the 50%?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that had to do with the consumption that was decreased, which was great. A lot of that, as I mentioned, that high share of it came from that renewable sources. In the EU and the UK, they really maintained that strong renewable performance, not quite hitting 100%, but sticking at around the 88%. And as that kind of represents about half of our global electricity use, that has a huge impact. And then really, it is a credit to Australia and New Zealand and our kind of APAC region that because of that renewable adoption, that really boosted it. So, the renewable share was from 8% in FY24 up to 21%, which I know, as I said, that's really driven by their consumption.
Okay, and you say, I think 100% renewable electricity for UK, Australia, New Zealand. So I guess for the other countries that haven't quite got there yet, are there some practical settlement? Can they learn from what's being done in those other places and copy that? Or what else do they need to do, if you like, to improve?
Yeah, I think it's a big street with that, right? There's hey, this is how great everybody else is doing, and there's also how we can really help and support. So one of the key areas is about site audits, site energy audits, really looking at understanding where their consumption is. We're also installing some sub-metering so we can get real-time data. So any visual changes that they make, they can see the results there and then. We are also really conscious in doing a review of the national renewable electricity instruments and ensuring that we continue to decarbonise our operation in line with those science-based targets, but being really conscious where renewable may not be the standard or approved practice in those particular areas are not available to them today. And then our absolute target reductions, we are, these will be achieved by moving our purchased electricity to those sources. And then, as I mentioned, that's really looking at our on-site generation and then reduction of volume of fuels burned in our facilities, and then also looking at our company vehicles. So how many of those are electric?
Okay, and I think I'm right in saying that the sort of progress you made overall when it comes to scope 1 and 2 emissions means that the company's nearly halfway to its 2030 target of 50% reduction. Are there any particular sort of next steps that will help you hit that target, or is it just sort of more of the same which will achieve sort of better results?
Yeah, I mentioned before, we're really looking at our company vehicles policy. There's a new one being launched this year, so that will really help to drive that, company engagement at the employee level. But at the strategy level, we're also looking at our real estate. So when it comes to any new leased buildings or any of our specific facilities or offices, etc., we're putting together an ESG real estate strategy and guidelines to make sure that we're not just focusing on the environmental factors for those buildings, but also the social and some of the governance processes that really come into that, and making sure that our senior leadership are part of those decision making. But ESG is kind of at the forefront of any of those decisions. So from a scope 1 and 2 perspective, I'm hoping that that's going to really drive forward there.
Okay, and then in terms of scope 3 emissions, which obviously in many ways the most difficult to sort of address. I think there's been a 10% increase in those emissions in full year 25. And what change was it the way you measure it? What's gone on there to make that happen, if you like?
Yeah, it was absolutely the way we measured it and in the engagement on that piece. So we've had an increase in the range of supplier specific data. So it's the data that we're collecting in those calculations. And of course, data availability continues to be a really huge issue industry-wide. But we're working alongside our key vendors to improve the consistency and transparency of that. But we received a lot more information. It was great, but it has its side effects.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the report talks about plans to obviously work with your vendors and partners to reduce those scope 3 emissions. Have you got any, I don't know, pilot programs, initiatives that you've launched or are launching? And I suppose as well, have you got any sort of target, or how would you measure the success of those initiatives, if you like?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think when it comes to engaging with vendors, it's always tricky depending on who they are and what engagement they play, and especially where we sit in the supply chain. It's always a tricky kind of up and down the value chain. But in FY24, the team launched the sustainability questionnaire with a third-party platform, and that was a really great opportunity for us to evaluate the risks of these major vendors. The intention of that initiative was to really deepen that understanding from a risks and opportunities perspective. And then what came out of FY25 was this opportunity for us to identify those high risk vendors and then really prioritize that engagement and improving transparency. In FY26, our plan is to really broaden that supplier coverage. We're really looking at how we determine what is high risk supplier to us and how we really engage with them. Looking at some strategic non-stock suppliers as well, not just looking at that vendor piece, and really ensuring that we've got that kind of compliance and stakeholder value engagement with them. But of course, in addition to that real kind of personal engagement with those vendors, we're also looking from a indirect perspective, indirect suppliers, looking at our enhanced waste management services that happen in the UK. And then, as I mentioned, we're looking at our car policy, but also looking at more travel guidelines, so how we can ensure we've got like lower carbon transport with the new travel management system. So really kind of expanding as many arms as we can into how we can engage on a personal level and then also on a strategic level too.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think Westcon-Comstor, you were the first major global technology distributor to have your net zero targets validated by the SBTi back in, was it 2023, I think? Has the company, have you benefited from that in terms of any competitive commercial advantages from the validation? I'd be interested to see what the feedback's been.
I mean, the feedback's been great. That's been a really big talking point at the very least from that side of things, and it has really trickled down into the rest of the business, so that everybody's really on board and really understands our commitment. But that what I think was the key purpose and has been a really big call out of SBTi is that it's been a mark of credibility. It really demonstrates where our commitment is when it comes to driving down these emissions, and it has given our vendors and our partners that added faith and assurance that we're on the right track and that we have credible plans to take place across our 2050 goals and all the other supporting goals that go alongside those. So it's really been a mark of commitment.
Okay, and I think I'm continuing the theme of first. I think I'm right in saying this. I think you told me when we arranged this, it's your first interview since you've joined Westcon-Comstor as the global head of ESG earlier in 2025. You've obviously been in the job for a few months now, so are you able to give us a sort of take or your take on the company's ESG maturity and the culture? Just what you found since you've been there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have been pleasantly surprised, although maybe surprised is not quite the right word, that especially in the tech industry, I think genuine determination can sometimes be difficult to get to. But what's been amazing about this organization is that it has been genuine from the C-suite all the way down. I haven't been here very long, and I have had an awful lot of people come and talk to me about how interested they are in this. And I would say I can really sense that there's a feeling that we either want to be industry leaders, for example, the SBTi consider, or fast followers when it comes to ESG, really understanding where we sit with the specific area that we are in the industry and how we can contribute meaningfully. I think it's been incredible to see how passionate the employees are and how everybody wants to make sure we're doing the right thing by our people, planet, and communities, which is how the whole responsible business is shaped. And it really is a core feature of the business strategy overall. It's everywhere you see it. So it's been nice to be able to push on some open doors.
Yeah, and in terms of the work you're doing, it'd be good to understand in terms of shaping your ESG strategy. I guess you've got to align with sort of global standards and then the priorities of the company, both the industry it's in and the stakeholders. So just anything you can share as to the work you've been able to do in terms of shaping the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the strategy was already great to start off with, right? There was a really strong program when I walked in, which was lovely to see. I think what shifted in the industry though is of course trying to make sure that you're mapping your strategy to both the highest thresholds for global standards. You know, we can sit here and talk about the European standards, but there's all sorts of new ones coming out all the time. For example, the Australian reporting standards that's recently. So trying to make sure we're reaching that highest threshold from a governance perspective, but then also benchmarking ourselves against our peers. We've done a lot more in terms of understanding where we sit, as I mentioned, either fast followers or being industry leaders, where do we want to go with that? And then allowing both of those two elements to really allow us to focus on what's material to us. We really want to make sure we're being both ambitious and pragmatic based on the size of the organization, how much we're able to contribute, etc. But for me, a key feature of the strategy moving forward is making sure we're really embedding ESG into every element of business. The appetite is there. We just have to make sure we're creating a program that really empowers everyone to take responsibility and do their bit in a way that is meaningful and, as I mentioned, pragmatic to what the company is and where we're going.
Okay, and in terms of how you sort of will measure the success of what you're doing over the next, I don't know, 12, 18 months, I guess to a certain extent it's a bit difficult because there maybe aren't too many specific things you can point to. I mean, obviously some of those increases we talked about, but are there ways you think you can meaningfully measure your progress, or is it more just anecdotally if you're having more conversations with people and you kind of everyone seems to think you're heading the right direction, or as I say, can you actually put it into sort of some meaningful metrics, if you like it?
Yeah, I think with ESG, it will always be hard to try and work that out, but not impossible. I think in the same way that with a lot of other business strategy, I think for me, it's making sure we can measure how everyone's bought into this, which is relatively intangible. But I really want to make sure that we are focusing on KPIs associated, of course, to our specific carbon footprint and the programs that we're looking at to lower those numbers. However, I really want to focus on increased opportunities for employee participation. I really want to make sure everybody feels like they are engaged and there's got a really, they've all got a platform to make sure that they're playing a role in this, whether that's more engagements across more employee-led initiatives, whether that's more dedicated days, environmental days, ways in which people can really get involved, switching things off for a day, volunteering more for a day, kind of really focusing on our employees is really important to me at the moment for KPIs.
Yeah, and in terms of perhaps just finishing off the conversation, I mean, what do you think, since you've been in the job, have you come to a conclusion as to what you think the role of distributors could and should be in terms of driving sustainability within the IT channel? I mean, I know there are some companies that are doing great things, including yourselves, but what's your responsibility, if you like, to the IT channel, the broader IT channel?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's relatively unique. I think when you've worked for a vendor before, or if you've worked for an end customer before, I think the clarity is there. But I think for me, distributors occupy an interesting position based on where we sit across the supply chain. So we're kind of in between those vendors and those partners, and we're that sort of step removed from the end customers. But our planet strategy, that really plays a crucial role into how we deliver that partner success. So they are reliant on us to operate responsibly, remain compliant, collaborating to drive sustainable innovation. How can we make sure we are listening to what they need from that perspective, but also helping them to drive innovation where they need to? And it also gives us a unique insight because it allows us to bestow a responsibility to take the lead on sustainability, demonstrating vision, and really taking our partners and our vendors with us as we seek to create a truly sustainable IT channel. So we have that kind of partnership, and that has to continue to grow, and we have to, allow that unique space to take up where others may not be able to see both sides of the coin. But in the broader context, I think we really recognise that environmental benefits are shifting to recurring revenue models and that kind of X as a service solutions over traditional hardware approaches. I think that's really key. We are able to have that vision and able to review both sides of that, as I mentioned before. And then we're also recognising there's opportunities for efficiency brought by generative AI, for example, but it's significant energy and water use demands that really careful adoption. And so making sure we've got transparency and comparability in the product and those impact calculations are critical to driving sustainability and accountability in our industry. And then it allows us to remain in that discussion, even though it remains a challenge for those vendors. So my hope is that it allows us to provide that context and perspective.
Excellent. I mean, it's been fantastic to chat to you, and thank you so much for sharing so many great insights. Particularly, bear in mind you're relatively new to the job, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, and maybe we can check in I don't know, another 6 months or so time, see how it's going. But Lisa and Laura, thanks so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it.